Hey guys, it's Doug. If you're new to web development, this video is for you. I'm going to show you my process for earning money with WordPress. By the end of this video, you'll know how I approach development, billing, prospecting, contracts, and even support. Let's talk about WordPress development. Because we're talking about WordPress, we're going to be using a template. Now I know there are a lot of free templates out there, but trust me, you do not want to use a free template. When it comes to templates, you get exactly what you pay for. I've tried to use free templates for personal projects and they don't even work for that. Most of the templates that I've used are between $40 and $100. Now that might seem like a lot up front, but don't worry about it because we're going to be billing that to the client, but we'll talk about that later on in the video. When it comes to picking a template, you really need to know the business that your client is in. You need to know whether they need things like third-party payment processing, calendars, or anything like that. If you're building a website for a podcast, you know that they need to be able to play back their episodes. They want to show their latest episode right up front. They need to be able to link to their various episodes as well as their donations for things like Patreon. And they need it to be responsive for web and mobile because, most people are listening to podcasts on their phone. For this particular project, I'd go with something like the Megaphone template. I've used this template before and it's really good. It gives you all the things you would expect from a podcast type theme and really gives you the ability to customize things at a really fine amount of detail. But you can't just slap in a theme and consider it done. Now we need to go through and update images and we need to change colors. If the company you're working with already has a marketing department or has an old website that might have logos or themes, I suggest trying to use those because those will give you good hints as far as what kinds of colors to use in the new site, and it'll also give you a feel for the kind of vibe that the company's going for. For example, you wouldn't make a website for a cleaning company and use a whole bunch of brown on the website. That just doesn't make sense. The association with brown and clean is not there. My biggest recommendation when it comes to images is to not use stock photos. They're okay if you're just looking to put something together to show your client as an example of what you could put there, but so many small businesses thrive on the relatability and trust of their local customers, so you really should be using images that they already have available, or you should be looking to hire a photographer to help you take some photos for their website. If you absolutely have to use stock photos because a photographer is not an option, then I suggest paying for a subscription to something like Adobe Stock. At least then, some of the photos you can get are more varied and they're usually higher quality. Moving on from development, let's talk about getting clients. This is by far the scariest part of this whole process, and I don't blame you if this is the part that you're dreading the most, but it's really not that hard. The two things that I recommend for prospecting new clients is to ask people in your inner circle, like friends and family, if they know of a business owner or somebody who has a side project that might be looking for some web development. Because you might already know that person or you have somebody in common, it's a lot more likely that they'll take you seriously and give you a shot rather than if you just cold call random businesses from the yellow pages. The second type of prospecting has been bulletproof for me, and I wrote an article about that, so I'll put the link in the description below this video. Essentially, you look for businesses that you know don't have the web presence that they should have for their particular industry, and you can see that their competitors have much better sites than they do. Just keep in mind, when you reach out to potential customers, don't beat around the bush and try to give them some sales pitch. A lot of small businesses just don't have the time for that. So tell them who you are, tell them what you do, and then try to schedule a time to talk more because chances are they're not going to have time if you just pick up the phone and call these guys to go through and talk about everything you need to talk about right now. Hey, is this Glenn? My name is Doug, and I develop websites for local businesses in our area, and I'd really like to learn more about your company to see if it'd be mutually beneficial for us to work together. Do you have time sometime in like the next 3 days that we could have a little bit longer call or sit down and talk about it? Okay, great. That's it. Just a couple of sentences. If they have time to talk now, you should always have some of your questions prepared, but this is a great starting point for approaching new clients. Next, let's talk about contracts and billing. Asking someone for money might seem hard, but it's not so bad. I use a program like QuickBooks because it allows me to send an email invoice so you don't actually have to have that awkward conversation where you go up to someone and say, hey, can I have that $600 you owe me for the website? Instead, they just receive an email invoice and they can pay however they like. Now, I know the big question on your mind when it comes to billing is, how much do I charge? I'm just getting started. What am I even worth? So the way that I usually figure out my billing is I take my expenses and my rate, and then I add 10% to that. And that's my total charge. Let's break down each one of those pieces so that you can understand my reasoning. Expenses are anything that it costs you to build the project. This might include things like travel time. You might have to hire a photographer to get photos for their website. You also might have to buy some plugins or buy themes like we talked about in the development section. Those are all types of expenses that you should be billing your customer for. So you should keep that in mind when you give them a quote. You might be asking, why add an extra 10% on top of everything that you've already done? Well, the reason I do this is because there's always late features that get added to the project that need to get put in, various support or bugs or some unexpected hitch. So I always add a little bit of extra to the project to help cover those costs in case there's any loss of time that I didn't bill for upfront because it was unexpected. What should you charge for a rate? Well, I can't tell you the exact number that you should charge because it depends on what level of experience you have, and it also depends on how comfortable you are billing your services, and it also depends on how much the project is worth to the customer. For example, if Nike wanted a 4-page WordPress website from you, it's probably worth a lot more to them than it is to someone who owns a cleaning company down the street. I generally approach billing in two ways. There's hourly billing and then there's flat billing. I think that everyone who's a beginner should start out doing hourly billing because it helps you find that dollar per hour price that you feel comfortable charging, and it makes sure that you get paid for every hour that you put into the project. But I think that flat rate billing is much better once you get the hang of things. There's no reason that you should be penalized for being more efficient. Instead, you should be using a flat rate billing structure so that way you get paid the same amount whether it takes you 2 weeks to get it done or 2 days to get it done. But I only recommend doing that if you really know what you're doing, because if this project goes way beyond what you expected, you could get stuck not getting paid for all your services. Usually, even for just an informational website or a small business website, you can put out quotes for $1,000 to $2,000 for just a single website, depending how long it takes you. Probably the most overlooked part of this is the contract. A lot of people think that you can just get away with a verbal contract or sort of a handshake deal, but you don't want that, and neither do they. The contract that I use has 4 main parts. The first part defines the scope of work, so that way you and the client know exactly what's covered. It covers the payment schedule, so you know when you're getting paid, and they know whether they need to pay up front, they pay based on progress, or if it's half up front and half when it's done. Those details are all worked out in the contract. Ownership of the project. Lastly, the support schedule. Now, this is optional because you might not be doing support for the site, but chances are you'll be doing some of it, and it's good to have the support options in the contract, so that way even if they don't sign up for support right away, both you and them know what the expectations are for keeping the site going in the future. Okay, the last things we're going to talk about are support and hosting. Web projects never stop needing updates because plugins get deprecated, browsers change versions, PHP version in the background might change, WordPress version changes, customers need new things added to their site. Those are all examples of types of support that you can give after the initial development of the website. I recommend always charging for support. Some people don't charge for support, but I think that's a huge mistake. Charging for support stops you from getting taken advantage of, and it also lets the customer know that you're serious about the support that you're offering. When it comes to support, I tend to charge just a little bit more for support than I would for my normal development rate, and that's because with support, you don't always know what the problem's going to be ahead of time, and it often requires extra research and extra effort on your part. And I bet you didn't even think about hosting. Unless your goal is to hire an entire team to manage your customers' websites and manage all of your customers' websites from now going forward, I recommend not hosting websites at all. Just don't do it. I prefer to host with sites like 1&1, GoDaddy, HostGator, all those guys. The main benefits to hosting somewhere else instead of with you is that if the client doesn't want to use you again for their next project or for the support on their project, they don't have to they're not stuck working with you. And additionally, if you decide to move on and stop doing web development because you just did it for a few months, or you're just doing it as a side job and now you're on to other stuff, they're not locked into you and you're not locked into them. Trust me, you don't want to have that awkward conversation where you tell a customer that something's happening with their website because you don't feel like hosting it anymore. And you also don't want to be 3 years out of a web project and have someone call you and say, hey, you remember that one website that you worked on for me? I wish that somebody would have sat down and talked to me about all these things before I got started with web development. So if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. I might even make a video response for you if it's something that requires a little bit more depth. Thanks for watching, happy coding, and I'll see you in the next one.